The February monthly economic update. As usual, I want to thank the three entities that produce and host this event. Then I have one brief announcement. Mary over here will have another brief announcement, and then we'll jump right into the evening's events. So, first of the three supporting organizations is the Judson Memorial Church. You are sitting in the Judson Memorial Church right now. It's been around a very long time, has an illustrious history, and we are proud to be a part of that history. We are here by the invitation of the senior minister of this church because in her view, what we do here is part of what she understands to be the mission of her church, which is something to think about. The second organization that supports this is the Left Forum. It's an annual gathering of left academics and activists. It's the largest of these things in the United States. It's been going for about 30 years, and it will occur, as usual this year, in the spring, in particular June 2nd to 4th, and it will all take place at the John Jay School of Criminal Justice unit of the City University of New York, which is on the far west of 59th Street in Midtown Manhattan. And the third organization is Democracy at Work. That's the organization I work with, and that literally produces each of these evenings. Also produces the weekly radio program that I think many of you know about that airs here in New York on WBAI, but that also airs in about 75 other radio stations across the country. Some of you asked me to mention it, so I will tell you about some of the places where we are on the air every week. Tampa, Florida, probably our biggest station. Something for you to think about too. Houston, Texas, Denver, California, I am proud to tell you, is a state where, no matter where you are, you cannot get away from an opportunity to hear me once a week. From San Diego in the south to Ukiah in the north and everything in between, we are everywhere in California, but also in a growing number of other places. 2 television stations now run the program here in Manhattan on channel 34, 8 o'clock Tuesday nights. MNN is the hosting institution. And in California, in the Bay Area, KSCM, a local television station, broadcasts the program there. And it is my hope in the next few weeks to announce to you more television stations, hopefully lots more. So this is growing, and I thought you might enjoy knowing it as well as we do. So here's the announcement I have to make before I introduce Mary. We have sponsors for these events, people who are kind enough to help us defray the costs of these things, which include the videography, which is being done in the back. This program will be up on YouTube, available probably within 24 hours. We usually get it done that quickly. But I wanted to thank tonight's anonymous sponsor. We are perfectly happy to announce the names or organizations that sponsor us unless they ask to remain anonymous. So I want to thank tonight's sponsor, who is hopefully listening or watching. We were allowed to say where this person is and where he or she gets the program. It's in North Reddington, Florida. Anyone here from North Reddington, Florida? Too bad, because you have a friend in North Reddington, Florida. Everyone at Democracy at Work is very grateful for the sponsors. If anyone watching or listening would be interested in sponsoring one of these monthly programs, just go to our website, Democracy at Work, that's all one word, democracyatwork.info/sponsor, and all the information about how to do that is available at the website at that place. And of course, we would welcome you if you did that. Final. I believe I mentioned this last month, but in case I didn't, let me do it now. One of the recent videos, I believe it was last month, could have been the month before, video of this evening's talk, this monthly talk, passed a milestone on YouTube. It was viewed by 100,000 people, which, if you think about it, we were very excited. We had not achieved that before. But it led us to understand in some of our interactions with the YouTube management that it would be an enormous help to us if you could, those of you that are watching around the world, if you could not only watch the video of this, but also subscribe to the Democracy at Work channel on YouTube. It would be an enormous help to us in many, many ways. And so we ask if you would please do that. It's the second request, other than the fact that I always remind everyone, the folks sitting here tonight paid $10 per person to help defray the costs of our organization. If you're one of the 100,000 people watching, think about hitting the donate button on the screen that you're watching so that you can do your part, like the folks here sitting have done their part in helping to finance what it is we're doing. So thank you for your attention. Now, in relationship to the action groups we are forming around the country, I want to introduce Mary over here, who works with the one here in New York, who has a short announcement for you.
Hi, everybody. So we are all here because we know the system is not quite working for everybody. And now is our time to explore which systems will work better. So we have Democracy at Work action groups that are meeting all over the country, but the one that we're asking people to come to is Wednesday the 15th of this month at 7 p.m. at the Brooklyn Commons. And we have 3 groups that are going to be there. We have the Education Committee, we have the Co-op Committee, and the Politics Committee. And a couple of things we're working on is, with the Politics Committee, we're actually lobbying legislators in New York State to pass worker-owned businesses into law so that anyone who wants to sell their business when they retire can sell it for considerable tax abatement if they sell it to their workers. So this is something tangible we can all do. And we also have a co-op committee who's working on making short films to educate people about what cooperatives are and what it would look like to work at an organization like that. So Brooklyn Commons, Wednesday the 15th at 7 p.m. If everybody can come out and support us and get to work, that'd be awesome. And anybody watching at home, please go to action.democracyatwork.info. We have a lot of groups around the country who are starting to form, and we want you to get involved there as well. So, thanks. So I have, if you guys haven't signed up yet, please, Paul's going to pass one out on this side. I'll pass it out on this side. Give us your email address, and we'll send you a quick reminder before the event starts, and we hope you come out to join us.
Thank you, Mary. All right, folks, so let's jump in. I promised to try not to make these talks, starting tonight, be about Mr. Trump and what he does. Clearly, he enjoys getting the attention, works very hard at it. Lots of folks are cooperating with this. I don't want to be one of them. So I have to from time to time, but I'm not going to focus as much on the latest thing he has or hasn't done, because I think there are more important things, basically, for us to be doing. Okay, so let's begin. I wanted to start today just with a couple of items that you may not have heard about, but that I think are really worth your being aware of. As you know, one of the things that we do is talk about the need to change the economic system. We do not shy away from being critical of capitalism as a system. We're doing that more and more. And the interesting thing is the audience for it is growing a great deal. This last week, there was a sign of it in a peculiar way, so I wanted to begin with that. Last spring, an institution at Harvard University called the Institute of Politics, which is located at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, that's purely coincidental. It's not an intentional kind of activity. They did a poll of Americans, random poll of Americans 18 to 29 years of age last spring, and they found that a majority of Americans in that age group, 18 to 29, don't like capitalism. Let me say this to you again. A majority, that's more than 50%. If you remember high school, 50 to 50%, it's more than 50%. They don't like capitalism. And that led a young man by the name of, I want to make sure I get this right, I believe it's Trevor Hill, to ask a question this last week in a public hearing of a very important politician who was sitting there and giving a talk. The politician's name was Nancy Pelosi, the head of the House of Representatives, the Democratic leader of the House of Representatives. And he quoted her these statistics from the Harvard poll. And he said it was his hope, and he would like her comment, that the Democratic Party was taking cognizance of this fact, that as the older people, etc., the younger people replace them, and the younger people clearly are not fans of capitalism anymore. And would she be okay with the Democratic Party accommodating that change in its base? She looked, I actually watched because I wanted to report this to you publicly, she looked visibly uncomfortable with the question. You could see in her face she really wished he hadn't asked it. Very nice young man who was very personable and made a good impression. So in her discomfort, she hemmed and hawed a little bit and then said, as if it were the most normal, natural thing in the world, but we're all capitalists. The Democratic Party is capitalist. She made it very clear. And then she went on to talk about other things. I want to stress to you all that the world is changing, and fast, about capitalism. It is not going to get much reporting in the press because the press is owned and operated by people who are not happy about this development, to say the least. And being unhappy about it, they're not going to spend a lot of time giving you detailed discussion of it. They are distressed by the poll at Harvard, not pleased. And one of the ways they can squelch this is by not reporting very much about it, which is why, in part, I'm telling you about it. And it also means that the leaders who read the same papers and watch the same TV the rest of us do are not prepared, like Mrs. Pelosi wasn't, for such a question. Didn't have a good answer, hardly had an answer at all. Well, then what does all of this mean? Well, if you read the poll at Harvard a little further, it turns out that 75% of American young people don't like capitalism, but they don't like the label socialist either. So their anti-capitalism really is about the system they know, which they don't like, but what to do and where to go, that's much murkier. They're not so clear. And the word socialism isn't an unmitigated logical alternative, not at all. Keeping that at a distance too, most of them. Well, then where are we going to go is the question that's behind everyone's head, in a sense. It's in their mind. If capitalism isn't so good, where do we go? And I wanted to take just a couple of minutes to respond to that. Of course, you could go, and my guess is we will be seeing that, you could go again in the direction that socialists took in the 19th and 20th centuries, when socialism in its modern form emerged. And for those people, the alternative to capitalism was pretty clearly worked out after a while. Where capitalism was private enterprises and markets, socialism was public enterprises and government planning. The businesses would be run by the government, not by private enterprises. And where private enterprises ran the businesses for their own profit, the government, the idea was, would run it for the benefit of all the people. And where the market kind of pandered to people who had money, planning would distribute goods and services more on the basis of some notion of social need. And socialism was therefore replacing private property with public property and markets with planning. And you could see that they believed that because in the Soviet Revolution of 1917, in the Chinese Revolution 1949, in the Cuban, in the Vietnamese, that's what they did. They took large portions of private enterprise and made them governmental, and they instituted a big planning apparatus to organize who got what, which is why education, medical care, and so on were distributed to everybody. It wasn't a matter of markets anymore. You didn't get the I mean, I know this will come as a surprise to you in America, but you didn't get medical care according to how much money you had. You got medical care because you were a human being. End of story. Okay, that socialism put an awful lot of power in the hands of the government. The government would become the owner-operator of the enterprises, and the government would plan the distribution of everything that was produced. Well, that is giving an awful lot of power to a government. And that didn't work out so well. I mean, it worked well in terms of economic development. And that was a major goal because countries like Russia and China and Vietnam and Cuba were extremely poor. When they made their revolutions, these were countries among the poorest in the world. And in a very short time, they became much less poor. I know for many in America, it's always hard, given the Cold War, to wrap your head around it. But let me just remind you of some numbers. In 1917, when the Russians made their revolution, over 90% of the people in Russia were illiterate. Couldn't read or write, lived in rural areas without roads, without electricity. You have to get it. It's the most backward country in Europe at the time. In 1917, they then went through the following experiences, basically. They lost World War I. They had a revolution. The revolution was followed, that's in 1917, in 1918, by a civil war. The country split and had a civil war, and during the civil war, 4 countries in the world invaded the new little Soviet Union with military troops. 4 countries did that. Britain, France, Japan, and the United States. 10,000 American troops landed in Russia to crush the new regime. Little fact for you to think about. No Russian troops ever came here, but our troops went there. It might make a bit more sense why they're afraid of us more than we really are of them. That's the history. Okay? Then they had an agrarian transformation, the collectivization of agriculture. Then they were the biggest loser of people and property in World War II. So this was a very poor country afflicted by 2 world wars, a civil war, a foreign invasion. I mean, for them to be able to say in the 1970s that they had become the second superpower after the United States is an achievement the world has very rarely seen. In fact, the only major country in the world to achieve an economic growth as spectacular as what the Soviet Union achieved is the People's Republic of China, which in the last 20 years has basically done the same thing, but without revolutions and wars. They didn't have that. They made a strategic decision to become the producer of goods for the world, which is why most of your underpants come from China. Okay, and so does your toaster, and more of the components of your car, and the components of your iPad or whatever it is that you have that's an object. So the communist or socialism that they did, this government taking over everything, was very successful as an economic growth engine, which is one of the reasons so many countries around the world are attracted to it. But it also put so much power in the government that if you got people in the government who had disagreements with the mass of people, they could, and they did, use that power in undemocratic, dictatorial ways, which the enemies of socialism made a big thing of, for understandable reasons, leading an awful lot of people not to want to go in that direction. Even if they're displeased with capitalism, reproducing what happened there is not the attractive option. Well, then, the problem is, and you see that everywhere in the world, where are people, the growing number of people, dissatisfied, unhappy with capitalism? Where are they going to go? What are they going to do? What is the next place to go? Or do we have to resign ourselves, like Mrs. Pelosi, to saying, capitalism? If you actually read her statements, she began distinguishing nice capitalism from not nice capitalism. No, but she meant that. Capitalism that isn't as oppressive. She was willing to say that capitalism in the United States today has produced great inequality. Give her that. She saw that, and she didn't like that. She wanted a better capitalism that didn't do that. So she wants to hold on to capitalism, but she's excited about better and worse capitalisms. But a growing number of people, particularly young ones, they don't want to go there. They don't want this system, they want something else. All right, the point then is, what might that other thing be? And one way to get at it is to ask or to recognize that what was done in the 19th and 20th century was, in a sense, the first massive effort to go beyond capitalism. Hadn't been done before. So it turns out they did some things well and other things not so well. They made some successes, they had some failures. There are lessons we need to learn what to do, and there are lessons we need to learn what not to do from what happened. Well, one of the things they didn't do was to transform the workplace. They were so busy moving from private to public, from market to plan, that the transformation of the workplace, where we as adults spend most of our lives, 5 days a week, 9 to 5, we work. And that experience, how we interact with one another, how we feel about it, what it does to us, is central to a better society if there's going to be one. So out of that comes, slowly and painfully, a recognition that transforming the workplace may well be the #1 focus for a socialism of the 21st century. It is going to have to do what the earlier socialisms didn't do. In the hope that if the mass of people become the owners and operators of their workplaces, take control of the workplace, they will have the wealth, the resources, to not give over any excess power to any government anymore. That the very way that this government is beholden to capitalists, and even a casual look at Mr. Trump's cabinet can give you a good glimpse into that, then we can imagine what a government would be like if it was beholden to enterprises that were in fact owned and operated democratically by the workers in a society. And our interest in worker cooperatives and the cooperative movement comes out of this notion that in that movement lie the seeds of a way to get to a better system that learns from the first efforts that were successful and unsuccessful, charts a new direction, and thereby gives the human race a place to try to go as the difficulties of this system get worse and worse, which I do have to tell you, much as I wish I didn't, as a professional economist, is what's going to happen. It's already happening, and part of our work here every month is, unfortunately, to document it. Okay, so in that framework, I look for and like to report to you when these things happen. So I was very surprised to learn recently, and one of you sent this to me, so I appreciate those of you who send me material, that in Spremberg, S-P-R-E-M, Spremberg, in the state of Brandenburg, that's part of Germany, a local hospital has been taken over by its workers and has been for some years now, and is producing absolutely remarkable results and getting a lot of attention, which is how it came to the attention of one of you who brought it to my attention. The majority of the shares, it's a shareholding hospital, are owned by the workers who are there, and they therefore make all the basic policies. So it's a worker-run hospital. I mention that to you because mostly when I talk about co-ops, I'm talking about companies that produce goods and services. Some of you have asked me, well, could that apply also to institutions that don't work that way? And the answer is not only it could, it already does. And this is a very interesting example. Any of you interested in details can see this here. Another example I learned about is Japan. Japan has arguably more of a cooperative sector than any Western country. I used to mention Italy, which is quite well developed as a co-op. There are parts of Italy where half the local economy is cooperatives. Emilia-Romagna, for some of you who know, one of the states in Italy, one of the provinces is the state. Roughly 40% of the economy in that area is co-ops. But in Japan, the statistics are really extraordinary. Give you an example. Japan's Consumer Cooperative Union, commonly referred to as the co-op in Japan, provides an enormous range of goods and services. It has 28 million members. It counts for membership is 37% of Japanese households are members of these co-ops. They do many billions of dollars worth of business every year. They are a mainstay. They have associated with them large numbers of cooperative banks that are also owned and operated by the people who have accounts in them. The whole cooperative sector in Japan is decades ahead of what it was here. And the irony is that most of those co-ops were actually created in the 1950s under the occupation of Japan by the United States after World War II. Remember General MacArthur? Some of you read the history. Well, he had American farming interests who came out of America's co-ops, which were once very strong, and they wanted to implant that because they believed that co-ops was a more secure way to ground, you'll love this, democracy in Japan than letting them become private capitalist enterprises. So they took off in Japan and they died here. That's called the irony of history. But the Japanese are very deeply committed. The only challenge to this co-op right now is another company that has captured their way of organizing vast deliveries of goods and services. Most of what this co-op does is deliver food and other items to the Japanese. They like delivery. They've liked it for decades. The company that threatens them now, Amazon. And they are now fighting to hold on to their dominant position and keep Amazon at bay. Okay. Now to the less uplifting. I need to tell you about a drug. The drug maker is called Kaleo, K-A-L-E-O, Kaleo. And they make a drug called Evzio, E-V-Z-I-O. Evzio is a way of injecting yourself with an item called naloxone. It is the antidote to a heroin or opioid overdose. As you know from my talks to you in the past, we are now living through a major epidemic of overdose, deaths by overdose. We had 33,000 last year. Let me do that again. 33,000 Americans died, at least what we can keep track of drug overdoses, mostly these opioid drugs. And this naloxone, comes in a little injector which has in it not only the needle that puts it in you, but has built into it, modern technology, a tiny little recording, and you press the button and the recording tells you how to go about injecting yourself. So anybody who has a sudden overdose attack can really, even if he or she doesn't know anything about this, press the button and has something that will explain how to do this. Up until 2 years ago, this injecting device cost $690, which is a lot. But last year, Calio, the producer of this thing, raised the price from $690 to $4,500 per shot. So let's now do the economics. Not that it's difficult. This is called the market. The market is a place where demands and supplies. This company controls the supply. They're the only one who makes this thing. They control the supply. The demand is created by the culture, the society, which is driving record numbers of people to blot out a reality they cannot bear by going off into what you get to if you use opioids. And they do it indiscriminately, and they kill themselves. So the demand for this is enormous as this epidemic plays itself out. And under the rules of the market, if the demand is going crazy and you control the supply, you are supposed to charge what the market will bear. And that's $4,500, leading all kinds of people to be unable to afford or even to think about it. I was struck by the example of the state of Vermont, which is interesting, not only because it has Bernie Sanders, but because it has gone further in the direction of a health insurance program for its people than any other state in the United States. But it also has one of the worst opioid epidemics in the United States at the same time. They can't use it. It's too expensive. They use an older form of the drug, which isn't as easy to administer, isn't as easy to pass around. So there are people who are doing without because they cannot afford it. A market is a system in which anything that is scarce, whether it's scarce by nature or scarce by the design of the producer, will then be sold to the highest bidder. That's what a market is. There's nothing to prevent Calio from doing this, so they did it. You remember Martin Shkreli, some of you saw him on television, who got caught doing that with another drug, and there were others. Well, in case you thought the television exposure meant that this wasn't being done anymore, you are in error. It is being done. Here's another example, only this one is even more egregious since it is an epidemic about which everyone is deeply concerned. There was a time in American history when the opioid epidemic was particularly harsh in African American communities. Now it's clearly cutting across all communities. In fact, the bulk of people now dying from it are not African Americans. And it's a testimony to this institution called the market, that it works like this. And it is always working like this. So let me take a moment to do a little more economics. What's the defense of this? How do you defend distributing things by a market when that's a system that gives things that are scarce, like this drug, to the people who can afford it and lets the others drop dead or get sick? What's the defense? Here's how it goes, and this is how it's taught to students across America and even across the world. You should let the market go. despite it looks bad, because think of the profits being made by this company when it can charge $4,500 for this thing it used to charge $690 for. That's going to make capitalists around the world and investors drool at the profits they can, and that's going to lead them to set up a lab to come up with another drug that could compete. So you see, it isn't all bad because it's going to stimulate. It creates an incentive for other people to come in and make medicines too. That's what we were taught. I remember a young woman in class raising her hand and saying, okay, I get it. If it's scarce and it drives the price up because it's scarce, that will make people invest. But you know, if it's scarce, what do we need a market for? We know there are people dying and the thing is scarce. So a human being who isn't demented will come up with a brilliant idea. Make more of it. Pay somebody to go and invent some more of it. What? We don't need to tell us that a market is this backhanded way of getting something done that a moron could figure out without a market, suggests that the market is looking desperately for a rationale for itself, but we don't need it. And when you think of what could happen, a little more economics. Kaleo Company isn't stupid. No capitalists are that stupid. What do they do when they have a deal like this is they get what's called patent protection. They file a document in an office in Washington, an obscure document that doesn't let anybody reproduce this for 17 years. That's what a patent is good for, basically. 17 years, nobody can produce this unless they give them the permission, which they don't have to do and which they won't. Because, of course, if they gave other people the permission, then they couldn't charge $4,500 because everybody would do it. So it turns out that the market protects itself. That is, it protects the winners. And a patent is a way of doing that. Well, how do you defend a patent? Here we go. You're going to learn economics. See, a patent is great because an inventor is excited to invent something because he or she will get a patent and then they can rip everybody off with it. And if they couldn't get a patent, they couldn't rip us off and they wouldn't bother inventing anything. This is a notion of a human being as a pig, as a person not motivated by anything other than how much can I get, no matter what expense of the population. If I can make a fortune off people overdosing on drugs, let's go for it. You know, ask yourself, are all the good things you ever did in life things you did because it made you a buck? Or were there maybe some other motivations that played some role? I don't know, things your mother told you, or things you got from your friends, or if you're religious, that come from your ethical upbringings. Come on. What kind of an insult of the human race is it to imagine that the only way we can organize invention of new goods is to do it by giving people the way and the incentive to rip their fellow citizens off indefinitely for 17 years? Companies have everywhere erected what we call in economics barriers to entry. It's what it's called in the textbook. A barrier to entry is erected by a company that has something whose supply it can control, driving up its price, but doesn't want to let other people enter, other producers enter, so then there's too much of it. The supply isn't reduced. What are barriers to entry? Well, the most important one, you've all heard of it, although you may not have thought of it this way. It's called advertising. Here's how it works. You make a dark-colored drink. You take water and you make it a dark color. You put some sugar into it. Any half-wit can do that and do it just as well as you can. But what the half-wit cannot do is cover every billboard in America with smiling people at the beach enjoying Pepsi. So anybody else who can make dark water with sugar has a problem. They can't sell it because theirs is called Nepsi. And nobody wants Nepsi. People would want Nepsi if only they could get $20 billion to make sure we always see Nepsi everywhere we turn, in which case Nepsi, Pepsi, we'd probably forget the difference. What's a barrier to entry is the spending on advertising. If any of you have wondered, these ads, I mean, they don't, who in their right mind would go buy something because this stupid ad? You're not getting it. It's not about getting you to buy it. It's getting you to be uncomfortable about buying anything that you don't see often. It's not that you're persuaded. It becomes part of the scenery. It's part of what's familiar to you. It's part of what you know. And that blocks the others. Capitalism is full of that. That's why capitalism has developed the advertising industry, which no economic system ever invented before. And that's not because they're stupid, but because they didn't work this way. But that's not your conventional economics. I figured that one out myself. Okay. Next item that I wanted to talk to you about. Oh, yeah. A moment for Mr. Trump, despite what I said. Well, sometimes, you know, he does things that are not only egregious of the sort that I'm sure you all see, but this may have slipped below the radar. And for a man who ran about helping the middle class and all the rest, this one was so delicious, I just had to bring it to you. President Trump, President, what was the other name that he got? President Trump has directed the Labor Department to review, that's a euphemism for get rid of, an Obama administration rule requiring financial advisors to observe what's called the fiduciary rule. Now, I understand if you saw this in the newspaper, your eyes would glaze over and you'd reach for another cookie because it sounds as exciting as last year's oatmeal. So let me explain to you why it is exciting. Once upon a time, Americans had pensions. We outgrew that, so we don't have them very much. But those of us who still have them notice that they changed over the last 20 years. They used to be what are called defined benefit pensions. Basically, you put some money away, or your employer did every week, and that got you a certain benefit when you reached 65 or retirement age. You knew you would get X dollars a month to take care of you. This the companies didn't like because it would really squeeze them, because if they put that money into an investment and the investment didn't go real well, they still had to pay you. So they wanted to have it changed. This was considered something that would give Americans freedom. When someone is going to give you freedom, hold on to your wallet because something is going to happen that's uncomfortable soon. So anyway, freedom meant the employer shouldn't have your money while you wait for it to retire. You should have the money. You should be free, there we go, to have that money. So what they did is they changed the pensions, so they're no longer defined benefit, you get a certain amount. Instead, it's called a defined contribution. In other words, every week, your employer takes out a little bit of money and contributes that amount, defined contribution, into a fund for you, and you become free to manage it. And in that freedom, you discover a hustle, if you're awake. Here's the hustle. You're not an investment specialist. You don't know how to do this. No one has ever told you how to do it. So you do what you normally do, like when your car doesn't work, you go to the mechanic, and there's a part of you that understands that you've just turned over something very valuable to a person who is inside laughing their head off because they can do almost anything and you're stuck. Well, an investment advisor is the mechanic of your finances. You're giving him the money, or her, but it's mostly men, giving them the money, and they invest it. They tell you what you should be doing. You should have this stock, you should have this mutual fund, you should have this government security, whatever it is they tell you. And there's loads of them. It's a huge industry. Okay, now here comes the fiduciary rule. It turns out, and believe me, there are Americans who didn't know this before, so this is going to come as a shock to some of you. It turns out that the advisor to you about how to invest your money may not always give you the best advice for you. He may give you the best advice for him. Because it turns out on this security, he gets 12 cents for every share you buy. On that security, he gets $4. This gives him an incentive, that's how markets work, an incentive to tell you not to buy the one where he gets 12 cents, but to buy the one where he gets $4. Even though what's better for you in your situation is to get the one for 12 cents. The fiduciary rule slowly produced over the last 6 years under the Obama administration had the following stunning idea. We would be able, you and I, to go into court and have a legal case against an advisor if we could show that the advisor put his interest as an advisor ahead of our interest as the client of the advisor. That's the fiduciary rule, that when he invests our money, it should be best for us. Radical breakthrough. Mr. Trump is getting rid of that. Okay? What that does is it means that tens of millions of Americans who are waiting to retire or having money withheld from their check every month or every week are going to be making investment decisions without an advisor who is required by law to do what's best for them. They're instead being put into whatever instrument is best for him. And if I had more time, I don't, I would stop now, and as I often say, I would play the national anthem for 4 or 5 minutes just to make everyone feel better. Next item, a success. House of Representatives Bill number 621, introduced into the House of Representatives some weeks or months ago by Representative Jason Chaffetz, C-H-A-F-F-E-T-Z, a representative in Congress from the great state of Utah. That was humor, what I just did. His bill would have the government sell 3 million acres of government-owned land. Because, of course, if the government owns something, it's bad, and if it's sold to the private, it's good. This is a major debate in economics, and it's a little bit in economics sort of like the debate, God is good, and the devil not so much. So government is bad, and the private is good, and Mr. Chaffetz, who comes from a very religious place, is clear about the bad government should sell the land to the private owners. Led by the Wilderness Society, one of these organizations, they mounted an enormous and ferocious campaign, and Mr. Chaffetz withdrew his bill this last week, and so that sale will not go through. I mention that because it does work sometimes if people do something about these things. Next item does again go to Mr. Trump, and it'll be something I'm going to come back to at the last half hour of today. The major argument made by Mr. Trump, both during his election campaign and now since having won, about immigrants, is the claim, repeated. I'll read you one. This is a speech Trump gave at the Republican National Convention about immigrants. Quote, "They are being released by the tens of thousands into our communities. with no regard for the impact on public safety or resources. We are going to build a great border wall to stop illegal immigration, to stop the gangs and the violence, and to stop the drugs from pouring into our communities. Over and over again, the association of immigrants with crime, all kinds of crime. So it's interesting that a group of sociologists, whose name I'm actually going to give you in case any of you want to pursue it, Robert Edelman, professor of sociology, University of Buffalo; Leslie Reed, professor of sociology, University of Alabama; Charis Kubrin, University of California, Irvine; and Graham Usey, College of William and Mary in Virginia. All of them have done detailed studies of hundreds of American communities, tracing what happened to drugs, murder, arson, robbery, all the major crimes, and showing what the connection was between the rising percentage of immigrants in these communities and the incidence of crime. No relationship at all, not even a little. In fact, in most cases, the incidence of crime went down as the percentage of immigrants in a community went up. And they even do some interesting speculations on why that may be. And the one I thought you might find interesting, because it's another irony of our economic system, that immigrants being poor are pushed into the most troubled areas and neighborhoods, which are where crime was, but when they get packed with immigrant people, the crime stops because everybody's always out on the street, everybody knows everybody. It transforms the community, which is probably why, that's their guess as to why the crime stops. But the notion that crime is in some way the product of or exacerbated by immigration, absolutely, and they're very clear, absolutely no relationship whatsoever. Next item. University of Michigan. An alumnus named Ross Eisenbray, who works with an important institution in Washington called the Economic Policy Institute. Some of you know that, epi.org, a source of very good economics information. He's upset about his alma mater, the University of Michigan. What upset him was the amount of money, because it's a public university, it's public knowledge, the amount of money paid to their football team leaders. So I thought I'd mention it to you just to get you envious. Okay. Their head coach is a man, some of you have heard of him, Jim Harbaugh. Okay. His contract was for $7 million. To leave the National Football League and to go to Michigan, he was paid $7 million. But that's not really what got this alumnus upset. He was interested in Mr. Harbaugh's assistants, the defensive coordinator, the offensive coordinator. That's not a description of the coordinator. It's about what the coordinator does. There's more humor. I'm putting humor in it, okay? The defensive coordinator, Don Brown, the offensive coordinator, Tim Drevno. Their contracts are worth more than $10 million over the next 5 years. The passing coordinator, you know, he coordinates from time to time. The passing coordinator, Pep, you can see why he's called Pep Hamilton, was lured from the Cleveland Browns with a 4-year, $4.25 million year. Okay, this money is paid by the state of Michigan. This is a public university. So tax monies in Michigan are used to pay tens of millions of dollars to a handful of football coaches. Okay. This is the same state whose largest city, Detroit, is disintegrating literally. whose suburb of Detroit, Flint, just saved money by pumping horrifically damaged water into its drinking system, damaging thousands of children in the city of Flint. And I could go on and on. So how do you justify spending tens of millions of dollars on a handful of people so that you can more effectively heave large men on top of one another over and over again until they get a concussion? Actually, you keep right on going even after they've had a concussion, as we know. How do you do that? And the answer is very important. Here we go. It's capitalism in the market. Why? As they will explain to you, we have to do that. Why do you have to do it? Because if we don't have the best team, then the attendance at our games will shrink. Then the TV contracts we get to broadcast and those games will shrink. In other words, it's the logic of the system. This university depends on the profitability of its sports events. And therefore, in order to secure the profitability of the sports event, it must use state money to ensure that profitability. It's the logic of profit. You know, they're absolutely right. What profit do you get by giving clean water to children in Flint? Nothing. Those are poor children. They're not going to amount to anything, and they'll all end up in jail. Or words to that effect. But this makes money. You hire a big fat coach, and he's going to bring people to the stadium. And that, it's the logic of this system. We can rail all we want about the immorality of this, but this is the way the system works. And if you want to stop it, you got to deal with that system. Morally castigating these people, that will get us what it's gotten us so far, which is not a whole lot. Okay. Let me turn now to the topics that we had for this evening's major conversation. And that does, of course, have to have us deal with Mr. Trump, at least in some ways, of what he's done. And what I want to talk about most is immigration. So I'm going to leave that to the end, when we have the end of our time. So let's begin with the treaties. Nafta, TPP, NATO. The United States, particularly at the end of World War II, entered into a whole host of treaties. NATO was one, CENTO, a whole bunch of them. The political type treaties, like those I just mentioned, were part of the American commitment after World War II to do what George F. Kennan, the major theorist of what we did at that time, said was to contain the Soviet Union. We had defeated Japan and Germany in the war. Those enemies were gone. We had done that together with the Soviet Union. For those of you that are young people and products of our school system, permit me a moment to remind you of something your teacher avoided. In World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies. We were on the same side. If you visited a post office in the United States in 1943 to get stamps, you would have seen over the counter where you bought your stamps a big photo of a gentleman dressed like Uncle Sam with the hat and all of that, arm in arm with a man identified as Uncle Joe. That stood for Joseph Stalin, because he was the honored ally of our president, arm in arm. You are part of a generation that may very well see another photo quite like that in the next few weeks. The faces will be different, but the idea will be the same. We were allies. But at the end of the war, having defeated Germany, Japan, Italy, the fascist countries, we had a falling out. with our ally. The ally became the enemy, and the enemy became the ally. It was confusing. A lot of Americans needed programs to be clear who's on what side. It took a few years. Okay? So these treaties were meant to contain the Soviet Union, our enemy. We surrounded them with about 2,000 military bases, many of which are still there, to make it impossible for them, we thought, to get out, to be able to spread the Soviet idea around the world. It cost a fortune. It led to all kinds of problems. But most importantly, it didn't work. But Americans are determined, and the fact that it didn't work didn't dissuade anybody about it. The best sign that it didn't work was this started in 1946 with the death of Roosevelt, really got going in the late 40s, and about the time it really hit its stride, the largest country on earth joined the Soviet Union. It was a sign not working real well. As the People's Republic of China went the other way. And then Cuba and Vietnam and so forth and so on. Didn't work. But these treaties were felt to be necessary parts of welding a global alliance against the Soviet Union. The second set of treaties, Nafta, the TPP, things like that, were different. They weren't about containing communism. They were about liberalizing world trade. The United States was the big economic power, and it wanted the freedom to trade everywhere, to invest everywhere, and so it had to break down all the little barriers that keep a company from doing something in Guatemala or in Malaysia or in Nigeria because of all the rules that are different, the currencies that are different, the laws that are different. The very idea of having one easy place to trade is part of American history because we had to solve that about all the states. We had to unify the United States so a company in New York can do business in Arizona and vice versa without 47 barriers and borders. Same thing is now going on a global scale with countries. Exactly the same thing. And so these treaties were written in order to enable the United States, that was the goal of this country, to do all kinds of things it couldn't do before. Okay? And NAFTA particularly important because it pulls together Mexico and Canada with the United States, allowing movement of people and allowing movement of products without paying duties and so on. The problem with all treaties is that the people who signed them, the countries who signed them, change. The treaty is all written down, fixed. So now you have a fixed arrangement among parties that aren't what they were. So sooner or later, it always has happened, they want to rewrite the treaty to take account of their new situation. What are they going to do? Mr. Trump is simply, in his typically brusque and undiplomatic way, simply saying, that's it, we're done, we don't want this anymore, we don't want this anymore, we either want no treaties or we want to rewrite them, to make them more advantageous to us. And he's pretty straight out saying that. For a long time we had multilateral treaties because we wanted the whole world to be conveniently accessible. This didn't work out the way Mr. Trump wants. American economy is in trouble, so he's to come up with the notion, no, we're going to have bilateral treaties. The United States is going to have one with Panama, one with Guatemala, one with Chile, one with Ivory Coast, and so on. This is, to use a technical term, nuts. Because first of all, you have to spend an immense amount of time negotiating. There's 183 countries in the world. Do the arithmetic. It's impossible. Number two, it generates hostility because each country wonders whether the deal cut with their neighbor, which happened 6 months later, has got better things in it than they were. So the unraveling and the anger and the resentment, that's why comprehensive multilateral was done, because the other is unworkable. But he has to do so. Well, what is he do? What is all this about? In every treaty, there are businesses that win and businesses that lose. Every treaty's details are good for some companies and not for others. For example, the TPP, General Motors loved it. Ford hated it. Ford was an enemy. General Motors was an ally. What's that about? Even the same industry couldn't get itself together on these things. So what ends up happening is governments get together to sign a treaty. And 8 million lobbyists representing all the different companies and industries are in there trying to get the language to be the one they want that helps them and not the one that helps the other one. And that what you get in the end is a mess. And that everybody, once it's written, begins to figure out, oh, this isn't good for me, and then figures out ways to evade it, which continues for 20 years until it's all rewritten again. Why am I telling you this? Because the last thing you want to do is get lost in the weeds of these kinds of struggles. They're not relevant to us. They're relevant to companies whose fortunes will be helped or hurt. That's true. But for the working people, for the mass of people, you don't know, and fundamentally, you don't care. It's not going to affect you directly. You are going to be squeezed by your employer, whichever way this goes. Moreover, we can't tell in advance how this is going to play out. Why? Because there are too many variables. For example, whatever the United States now signs with, I'll pick one, France, the Germans are going to react to that. Some of the French companies hurt by it are going to react to that. They're going to buy a plant in Switzerland because that way they can sell it out of Switzerland, which has a different deal with the United States. And it's, it's 5 miles to cross the border from France to Switzerland. This is not complicated. And that part of Switzerland speaks French. It's even easy. Not a problem. You don't know what all the retaliations are going to be. You don't know what all the evasions. So for you to say, I'm for TPP, I'm against, what? You can't. People who spend lifetimes studying this don't know exactly how this is going to play out. You haven't a clue. And that shouldn't worry you because it doesn't matter to you very much. You don't know and it won't matter to you much. Your problem is the system you live in. And that system isn't being changed. It's just being shuffled around a little bit by the players. For you to get wrapped up in that is a strategic mistake. You're focusing where you don't need to. And therefore, you're not spending time and energy on the organizations and the targets that really will or could change your life. Don't get suckered in, is the message here. Second point, the world is more integrated, the global economy, than at any time in human history. We happen to live at a time where this has really gone further. You all know that, right? Your outfit today comes from literally all corners of the world. Your appliances at home come from all corners. Your vehicles come from all corners. I mean, we are really integrated on a scale that is stunning. It was therefore never more true than at the present that when you make a change, the ramifications take years to play themselves out and cannot be known in advance because there are too many variables. That's what an international economy, means. The United States is also no longer the only dominant power. The Chinese are not what they were. They know it. Washington knows it. Russia knows it. Everybody knows it. Maybe not the average American person because of our media, but it's a new game. And the Chinese have lots of weapons. And if they begin to use them, we have no idea how that's going to play out. They don't know, which is part of why they hesitate to use their weapons. The Chinese now possess about $3 trillion worth of what's called foreign exchange, mostly dollars. If they dump those, nobody knows. By the way, they've dumped about a trillion in the last year and a half. They are dumping. And that's because they don't have confidence in the United States the way they did. They're not going to be stuck holding dollars. You and I are stuck holding dollars because we live here. They don't have to. And they're doing something which, if you pay attention, ought to be of some concern to you. If you possess something that everybody else who has a lot of it is getting rid of, hello, maybe it's time for you to wonder what that might be about. And the Chinese will tell you, no hesitance at all. We are interdependent. Same thing is true with Mexico. Once again on Mexico, because it's close, and it'll be the one that blows up first. Mexico and the American economy are now deeply intertwined. That was the purpose of Nafta in many ways, and it was achieved. Millions of Mexicans lost any way to make a living in Mexico, which is why they left Mexico. Because they were, I'm going to exaggerate, but not by much. They were given a choice. You can stay in Mexico and die, or you can go north and live. Freedom to choose. And they took their freedom and made their choice. If we were, in fact, to send them back, what are we sending them back to? To do what? How? Who's going to buy what it is they could produce if even they get a job? There are no jobs. That's why they came here. Do we want as a nation a completely disintegrated state along our southern border? What? Today, in large parts of Mexico, we have barely society left. If you pay any attention, you know that. This is going to make all of that much, much worse. What about that? To try to get a sense of the interdependence, there are estimates now, companies that are drooling at the prospect of getting the contracts to build the wall between the United States and Mexico. And they came up with the following stunning upset. Half of all the construction workers currently in Texas are undocumented Mexicans who would have to be hired to build the wall that will prevent them from coming in to do the work they were hired to do. We are not a crazy people, but when we do crazy things, it's a sign that something is wrong. Something isn't working out real well. If 10 or 20 million Mexicans and Central Americans, since we don't really understand who's what anyway, and there's a big incentive for the folks coming to keep that murky for all kinds of reasons. I assume all of you know that. This is a country of immigrants. And one of the great joys of our ancestors coming here, I certainly speak about my family, was that when you arrived, in my case, my parents came from Europe, but when you arrived here, you could do something you couldn't do at home, which is tell colossal lies. You could make up a history which was much more attractive than your actual history. You could have come from this family and that family and had this education. And this person was your wife. Turns out maybe was your sister, etc. Complicated, very complicated. It's one of the great joys of an immigrant culture. All immigrants take advantage of that. They always have. They always have. What are you going to do? Unravel all of this? You really want to do that? You want to send all these people back? Mexicans in our culture do an incredible amount of work. Our construction industry is unthinkable without undocumented workers. Unthinkable. Who's going to do all the work in New York City? You all know, you can see Mexicans, or at least they look a little bit like Mexicans. They're doing an awful lot of work. Who's going to do all that work? And at what rate of pay? And if you have to pay Americans who aren't of Mexican origin the kind of wages that those Americans think they ought to get, well, then the price of everything is going to go nuts, isn't it? Starting with your coffee and your restaurant and your dry cleaning and all the other little daily things that are going to cost you twice as much as they did before, in which case you'll be real sorry that the Mexicans aren't here anymore. And the businesses that depend on those Mexicans, and the housing stock that's going to sit there empty with the rents not coming in, and the loans based on those rents that can't be repaid, and the banks that go out. You ready? None of this has been worked out. Mr. Trump has no clue about any of this. He never gives the slightest hint that he has an idea, let alone a plan, to deal with any of it. Because this is not about, and this is the punchline, folks, this whole immigration thing is not about immigration. That's why it's not thought through. It's not that Mr. Trump is silly or Mr. Bannon is crazy or whatever. I mean, they may be silly, they may be crazy, but that's not the point. This is not about immigration. Immigration becomes exciting, not because it is the key to our economic situation. Otherwise, you'd have a hard time dealing with how immigration is so important, say, in a country like Greece today, with a completely different economy from ours, or Germany, or France, or England, and there's lots of others. Those are countries with radically different economic problems, but they're all finding it exciting to beat up on immigrants. What's going on here? The American economy is in trouble. Capitalism isn't working for the vast majority of American people, and that's true of the British people and the French people and the Greek people, etc. The Greeks particularly, if you follow that, it's really extraordinary what is being done to that entire society, what little bit is left of it. These societies are not working real well. And when societies begin to break down, when the level of their problems begins to get to the point we are at, you face a kind of existential crisis. There are going to be voices raised saying, it's the system. That's what I do. That's why I'm here, to tell you it's the system, and I'm not the only one. That's why those folks interviewed by Harvard that I began with answered the way they did. These are not people I know or that I reach. So if you have a moment when a system is in crisis, it's got to come up with an explanation for its problems that lead to actions that can be taken that leave the system out of the conversation. And that's what immigration is for. It's always been for that. In 1929, the world capitalist system crashed. It crashed in most countries, but it crashed particularly harshly in Germany. So let me tell you a story about Germany back then. The Germans had a capitalist system of which they were proud, but they had also suffered, and that scared them. They suffered because in World War I, they lost, and a tremendous fine called reparations was put on them. So they not only lost the war, but they had to pay the countries that beat them for years afterwards. One result of this absurd situation of being defeated and then having to pay a reparation was that their economy blew up, and in 1923 they had the worst inflation that any country has ever had. To remind you, if you're not aware of it, in a period of 8 months, the German currency was called the Deutschmark, M-A-R-K. The Deutschmark went from 4 Deutschmarks to $1 to 20 billion Deutschmarks to $1. You got currency. My mother was German. My mother lived through that. She told me the stories. Her father would come home from the store where he worked in the middle of the day for the lunchtime. He couldn't wait till the evening. He got paid in a bag of money at lunch for the first half of the day, ran home like a relay runner, handed it off to my grandmother, who ran to the store to spend it, because if you waited till later the afternoon, it wouldn't be worth anything. Prices were doubling every 20 minutes. Okay, that's an inflation. We haven't had that yet. That comes later. So the Germans were traumatized by losing the war and then by that great inflation. And they thought they got back on their feet from the end of the inflation around 1923-24 until the Depression hits in 1929. But that was too much. Suddenly to be thrown out of work, it became too much. Too much suffering in too short a time, too much of a damaging blow to their notion of the German people and all the rest of it. So they went crazy as a people. It was too much. It was too much. And so they put their faith in a weird person. A person who was short and dark and who believed that the people who were the greatest were tall and light. But who cared? Because he had a story to tell. What laid Germany low wasn't capitalism, wasn't business, wasn't the organization of enterprises, wasn't the bank. It was foreigners who had gotten into Germany, and we would be okay in Germany if we got rid of them. Literally. So they began, push them out. When that didn't work real well, the second solution was cook them, kill them. And that made sense because they were the one, they destroyed it all. That's why we have to be told immigrants make crime. They don't. But who cares? It's a story. It pinpoints the enemy, the problem, the cause of our difficulties, and therefore the solution. Get rid of them. Ban them. Mexicans, Muslims, who cares? Make it up. And the populations in Germany were complicit with this. They hopefully thought, well, okay, I mean, maybe that's the problem, so let's get rid of those people. We don't know them, care about them all that much. They probably didn't imagine that they would be killed, but at least get them out. Get the Mexicans out. The fact that if you send them back to Mexico, given what Mexico is today, it is a death sentence for large numbers of them anyway. No, you don't pay attention to that. You focus on immigration as if it were the problem. That's its point. It's to deflect criticism of the system onto something utterly unsystemic. Gives you somebody to hate, gives you somebody to point the finger at, gives you somebody to be angry about, gives you a politician who says, vote for me, I'll take care of it, I'm going to put a wall, I'm going to keep them out, I'm going to, and nobody else is helping you. Mr. Trump to Mrs. Clinton, what's she doing for you? She's more of the same. She's Obama light, pardon the joke, right? She's Obama light, and so it's more of the same. I'm going to actually do something. And given the choice between something and nothing, a lot of people choose something. But it would be a catastrophic error of us to get into long debates about the TPP versus some other arrangement, or immigration versus not immigration. It's easy to show that immigrants do as much good as they do any kind of problem. Do they lower wages for local people? Probably. Do they create jobs for local people by buying a lot of stuff? Yeah. Do they rebuild the depressed parts of communities? Yeah. Do they keep the universities alive in this country? Yeah. They do good things, they do bad. Like anybody else. They're a mixed bag. But are they the problem that's going to solve our situation? Not even close. If they stay, if they don't stay, our problems will remain. If we don't deal with the economic system we have that produces all of this, that produces the collapse in 2008. You know, Mr. Trump has been trying to run for president, I don't know, all his life. He was a standing joke until The system crashed in 2008, whereupon he becomes a serious candidate. He's a product of a system breaking down. And every idea he stumbles on with Mr. Bannon to push this or to push that is his way of trying to be relevant in a time of disintegration. For us to get caught up in this junk that spews out from him every afternoon's Twitter time is nuts. It's nuts. It works for him because he's all over the place. He's saying, nah, nah, nah. Good. He's a showman. He's doing something. The rest of the political system is doing nothing. When Mrs. Pelosi says we're all capitalists, shrugs her shoulders, that's more of nothing. She's not going to do anything. That's really what she's saying. She would prefer a nicer capitalism. Oh, you got to stop. Takes your breath away. Thank you very much. It's what we need. A politician who prefers nicer capitalism to harsher ones. Fantastic. No wonder they can't get going. And for those of you that haven't paid attention, the control of the White House is the least of it. The Republicans now have a majority of the state governments in this country. They have a majority of the positions at county level. I mean, they are everywhere assembling a notion of what's going on that is the antidote to a systemic critique. The Democrats don't dare have a systemic critique. The Republicans are busy deflecting us away from a systemic critique, which means that we have to do that, or else there's no opposition here. And then it'll continue, and it'll continue, because the economic problems of this society are not going away. The rest of the world is not playing dead to allow the United States to do what it does. We're not going to rewrite treaties all over the world to make them better for us and worse for everybody else. To believe that is to be crazy, not to pay any attention. So it's a very important time to avoid being sucked into debates and controversies that are not our business. What this country needs is real opposition. So my final point. The Cold War ended any chance that the United States had, because we had experimented with a politics in which one of the basic issues politicians would debate is capitalism versus other systems. For the last 50 years, we've had two parties that are both enthusiastic supporters of the same system. That doesn't make for very interesting politics, which is why half of the American people have lost interest. And I'm being kind by saying only a half. I find it hard to keep up my interest. And I'm interested. So maybe now, maybe with Occupy, maybe with Bernie Sanders at least opening the space, we can finally mature as a society and have two parties, Republican and Democrat, that are cheerleaders for capitalism, and a new political force, a new political party that has the courage to say, thank you, capitalism, you did a nice job, you're done. Go sit on the bench, or any place, go away. We can do better, and we're a political force that is working on that project, and let the American people actually choose. If that poll at Harvard that I began with tonight gives us any clue, we shouldn't be afraid of going in that direction, because with each passing year, the majority is getting closer to that than it is to any other position. Thank you very much for coming, and I hope you come in March.